Well, hello folks. Phil here from the Blue Envelope channel. So in this video, I wanted to take a step into kind of the speculative realms and consider possible future changes we may see in the religion of Jehovah's Witnesses in the coming years. Specifically, I wanted to do that by considering changes that the Mormon Church has made in recent times. The parallels between Jehovah's Witnesses and the LDS Church are very interesting. Now, theologically, they're pretty different, but structurally, how they're organized, they're very similar in many ways. And the cool thing is, although they are roughly the same timeline, they're both recently formed American religions, Mormonism did start about 50 years before Jehovah's Witnesses did. So in some ways, they've already hit roadblocks on things that Jehovah's Witnesses haven't come up to just yet. So just as kind of a proof of concept, let's talk about a few things that the LDS Church did first and then Jehovah's Witnesses did too. Okay, so in 2010, the LDS Church built a permanent Middle East movie set in Utah that they could use for various projects about Jesus. Around 2022, Jehovah's Witnesses built a permanent Middle East movie set. Theirs is in Australia that they could use for various projects about Jesus. Now, after the LDS Church completed their Middle East movie set, they began producing a series of videos recreating the life and events of Jesus. They've since completed that, and they're now into the events of the first century Christians described in the book of Acts. After Jehovah's Witnesses completed their Middle East movie set, they began producing a series of videos recreating the life and events of Jesus, and they're currently in the midst of producing that series. Okay, in 2008, the LDS Church introduced Matt and Mandy. This was an animated cartoon series for children. It's about two kids, an older sister and her younger brother, and their experiences growing up in an LDS family. In 2013, Jehovah's Witnesses introduced Caleb and Sophia, which is an animated cartoon series for children about two kids, an older sister and her younger brother, and their experiences growing up in a witness family. The interesting thing is, after the Witnesses started releasing videos on Caleb and Sophia, the LDS Church started a new animated series about another Mormon brother and sister named Miguel and Sophia. Okay, back in 1996, the LDS Apostles, which the Apostles are equivalent to governing body for witnesses, so LDS Apostles and then General Authorities, which are basically equivalent to governing body helpers, they all withdrew from serving on the boards of directors of church-owned corporations, with one exception of the Deseret Management Corporation, which is kind of a holding company that owns all the other church-owned corporations and businesses. In 2000, Jehovah's Witness governing body members withdrew from being on the board of directors of all their Jehovah's Witness-owned corporations. At least up to this point, governing body helpers with the witnesses can still be on the board of directors, though. Okay, way back in 1915, the LDS Church introduced Family Home Evening. So this is one night during the week that the family would get together, they'd sing songs, they'd pray, they'd study some LDS materials, and just do some enjoyable activities together. After the congregation book study for Jehovah's Witnesses was eliminated in 2009, Jehovah's Witnesses introduced Family Worship Evening, which is one night during the week that the family would get together, sing songs, pray, study Jehovah's Witness materials, and just do enjoyable activities together. It is true that Jehovah's Witnesses were long encouraged to have a family Bible study one evening a week, but often this was modeled on the family study at Bethel headquarters, which was simply just studying the Watchtower study article for the upcoming Sunday. In contrast, headquarters encouraged parents to make this family worship evening more fun for kids, to kind of have a variety of activities, much as Mormons do at their family home evening. In 2000, the LDS Church introduced something called pass-along cards, which were small business card-sized cards with a picture and a link to the church's website to get more information. In 2016, Jehovah's Witnesses introduced contact cards, small business card-sized cards with a picture and a link to the organization's website for more information. Okay, and for this one, I actually have to explain. I started this document back in 2023. So this is one item I've had to move from the possible category to the it happened category. And that is that in 2019, the LDS Church announced that sister missionaries would now have the option of wearing pants out in service, although they would still have to wear skirts or dresses at meetings at church. In 2024, Jehovah's Witnesses announced that sisters would now have the option of wearing pants out in service and at meetings, although they still have to wear skirts or dresses if they have a part on the meeting. This is another one that I moved from the possible category to the it happened category. In 2020, the LDS Church rebranded their disciplinary processes to appear more friendly. So for Jehovah's Witnesses, the disciplinary tribunal is called a judicial committee. For Mormons, it was always called a disciplinary council. In 2020, they changed that name to a church membership council. Their disfellowshipping, which is actually equal to a witness being publicly reproved, they renamed disfellowshipping to formal membership restrictions, and their excommunication, which is equal to JW disfellowshipping, is now called removal of membership. In 2024, Jehovah's Witnesses rebranded their disciplinary processes to appear more friendly. And by the way, we should say this is strictly just changing the names of things. The actual processes are the same as ever. But Jehovah's Witness Tribunal has been renamed from Judicial Committee to Committee of Elders, and disfellowshipping has been renamed to removal from the congregation. The middle level of punishment, being publicly reproved, continues with the same terminology. And this is just something we've seen a general trend in Jehovah's Witnesses for more and more content of the annual convention to be produced at the religion's headquarters and then broadcast out to members. In fact, during the pandemic, the entire convention program was produced by headquarters and then made available by streaming and video to everybody around the world. And that's very much like the LDS Church, which has long produced its conventions from headquarters. So whereas Jehovah's Witnesses have a main 3-day convention every summer, Mormons have two 2-day conventions, one in the spring and one in the fall. They're each called General Conference. And so about 20,000 people can attend them in person in Salt Lake City, Utah, and then everybody else just watches it where they're at, generally streamed live if the language translation allows. Okay, then I had another category, which is stuff that both religions do. Both religions have a very similar process for handling child sexual abuse. So when one of the appointed men in the congregation learns of CSA, they're instructed to immediately call a hotline set up by religion's headquarters. Now, unfortunately, in each case, the other end of the line isn't a social worker, it's not CPS, it's the religion's legal team. So the LDS Church uses the law firm of Curtin McConkie, which has long handled the church's legal issues. It's situated right across the street from church headquarters. And then Jehovah's Witnesses have an in-house legal team that examines these CSA reports. And in both religions, the advice they give to local leadership is always to hide behind clergy penitent privilege, if at all possible, to avoid having to report CSA within the religion to outside authorities. And in each religion, this has had the very predictable result of countless men being able to abuse again and again without the authorities' knowledge and without members being aware that there's people in their congregation that have a documented history of CSA. Another thing they both have is in each religion, we've seen a progression where headquarters gets less and less responsive to inquiries from members. So in the early days of each religion, members could write in to headquarters and ask the top leaders questions on theology or practices they didn't understand. And generally, the leaders would write back. And we kind of see this progression in Watchtower literature where early magazines had articles and letters, and it had the person's name signed at the end. And then eventually it evolved to, there was a column in the Watchtower, questions from readers. And then in the Awake, it would have from our readers. And they did just people's initials after a while. And then that was eliminated, and everything was just anonymous. And as exJW Critical Thinker YouTube channel has explained in a video, the questions from readers at that point, they weren't really questions anymore from actual readers. They were more just a way for Watchtower to publish opinion pieces on what members should think about a subject. And now in both religions, letters sent to headquarters are typically just bounced back to the local leadership, whether it's the circuit overseer for witnesses or the equivalent LDS's stake president, and then the local elders or bishops in the congregations. Of course, the trouble with that is if the member's concern was with the elders or the circuit overseer, somebody in the congregation, those problems are just going to fester because upper management doesn't want to be bothered with those lower level member concerns. Another trend we've seen in both religions is that each religion is reporting less and less figures to the members. The LDS Church has reduced how much data they reveal to members about their growth, and they kind of restrict it now solely to selected numbers that are moving in a positive direction that they're proud of. With Jehovah's Witnesses, they used to always publish a monthly report in the Kingdom Ministry of how the country was doing in the ministry. In January 2009, they eliminated that report and just switched to a box called Field Service Highlights, which they just put one or two selected positive metrics in there each month. And then, of course, in 2023, Jehovah's Witnesses discontinued collecting reports altogether from publishers on how many hours they were preaching in the ministry. Now, there are actually a couple things where witnesses went first. In 2009, Jehovah's Witnesses reduced their weekly worship services by 1 hour when they eliminated the congregation book study as a separate meeting. And so they went from about 5 hours a week down to 4. In 2019, the LDS Church reduced their weekly worship services by 1 hour, going from 3 hours on Sunday down to 2. In 2014, Jehovah's Witnesses eliminated live action stage dramas at their summer conventions, and they switched to video dramas that were pre-produced at headquarters. In 2020, Mormons eliminated the live action stage drama that they ran every summer at their property in Palmyra, New York, called the Hill Cumorah Pageant. It had run for 83 years. Okay, so let's check out some things that we may well see in Jehovah's Witnesses down the road. One thing is I think we'll start to see Jehovah's Witnesses just draw more of a distinction between doctrines and policies. This difference is very big in Mormonism, especially with really offensive things like they had the racism of excluding black people from full membership until the 1970s. And people would try to excuse it by saying, well, that was never an official doctrine of the church. It was just a policy. And interestingly, conversely, when church leaders were trying to get buy-in from other leaders to try and reverse that policy on black people being able to receive the priesthood, if it was viewed as a policy, it meant it would be easier to change versus if it were an official church doctrine. Now, a kind of related aspect to this is when church leaders would say something wrong or offensive, a common Mormon explanation is that when he said that, he was speaking as a man. In other words, those were just his personal thoughts. They could be wrong. Whereas if it were under the guidance of the Holy Spirit and he was speaking as a prophet, well, then those words would be sacred. Now, the obvious problem is nobody knows in the moment if the leader's speaking as a man or a prophet. It's only in hindsight that you can tell. If it was something later deemed offensive, well, that's how you know he was speaking as a man. And the current church leaders can then disavow what that old leader said, kind of throw him under the bus a little bit. But in the modern day, no member can ever listen to a talk given right now and say, well, I can ignore or disobey that because he's speaking as a man. Everything said currently must be taken as gospel. And it's the same with the distinction between policy and doctrine. No current rule from the church is ever delineated as being a policy versus a doctrine, and something that members could choose for themselves which policies to obey. It all needs to be obeyed by members. It's only many, many years after the fact that bad teachings can be dismissed as mere policies. And so I think we're starting to see that a little bit for Jehovah's Witnesses. It was particularly noticeable to me in the 2023 video where governing body member Stephen Lett introduced that new policy that brothers are now allowed to have beards.
A number of branch offices around the world have written to us indicating that there continue to be questions about whether or not it is proper for a brother in an appointed position to wear a beard. After prayerful consideration, the governing body has concluded that there is a need to clarify this matter. The governing body does not have an issue with brothers wearing beards. Why not? Because the scriptures do not condemn the wearing of beards.
So what's interesting to me here is he's basically saying, hey, it's cool with us if brothers wear beards. I don't know why there's all these questions about it. He doesn't say we no longer have an issue with beards. He just says we don't have an issue. And so by doing that, he breaks all continuity with previous governing body administrations and kind of throws those previous leaders under the bus, that this whole beard thing was actually their fault. Now, the truth is somewhat different. If you look at the JW Facts article on beards, it demonstrates a basically unbroken line of policy since the 1920s from Jehovah's Witness leadership, uniformly condemning beards, and it even includes letters on various Bethel branches letterheads from as recently as 2021. Now, Stephen Lett has been in the governing body for 24 years now, so it's difficult to say that it was some mythical governing body deep in the past that should be blamed for this rule. Another interesting point that jumped out at me is he specifically calls the beard rule a policy as opposed to a doctrine.
Others might feel disappointed, saying, in effect, I supported the policy about grooming for all those years. Now, I feel let down.
Now, I think we all know that the rule against beards was a big deal in the organization, and it was strictly enforced. But him framing it as a policy kind of reduces its importance or seriousness. Now, the trouble, as we mentioned, is that members only know which rules are the less important policies after they're discontinued. So I think we may well see more use of this technique of splitting the religion into doctrines versus policies in coming years. And then when you combine that with the explanation that a governing body member was merely speaking as a man when he was teaching something that was later discarded, that'll really be an effective tool to help preserve the faith of members. Now, this kind of ties into my next possible prediction, which is that I wouldn't be surprised if Jehovah's Witnesses start releasing printed transcripts of talks given by the governing body and governing body helpers at major events like conventions, Gilead graduations, the annual meeting. This is something that the LDS Church does. So after their main events, the general conferences, which are held twice each year in April and October, the May and November issues of their monthly magazine called Liahona, it replaces its usual content with transcripts of all the talks from the conferences together with who gave it. Now, right now, ex-witnesses have to manually create transcripts of noteworthy talks, which is quite tedious. But the thing is that active JWs also have to do that. But the thing is, headquarters already has the transcripts. We know that because a number of the talks, especially significant ones that unveil new understanding, they're later released as Watchtower study articles. So, for example, at the 2021 annual meeting, governing body member Jeffrey Jackson gave this talk called Are You There? And it was about the Book of Life, where he talked about people's name being written in pencil. Well, the talk later appeared in the September 2022 Watchtower as a study article titled, Is Your Name in the Book of Life?
So all of us want to have our names written in that book, don't we? But if we do have our book name in that book, does that mean automatically that we will receive everlasting life? No. We remember what Jehovah said to Moses as recorded in Exodus 32. There he said, anyone who sins against me, I will wipe out from my book. So names can be erased from this book of life. It's as if our names are written in this book of life in pencil. So all of us surely want to make sure that our names remain in this book of life right through to the time that they are written permanently in the book in pen, as it were.
Here's another example. At the 2022 annual meeting, governing body member Samuel Hurd gave a talk called I Will Never Abandon You. And this is the talk where he talked about the anointed fighting alongside Jesus after their resurrection to heaven. The talk later appeared in the February 2024 Watchtower as a study article with the same title, I Will Never Abandon You.
So when the anointed are called to heaven, one of the first assignments is to fight. Yeah. Now that's interesting. Some of us were fighters before we became true Christians. Some even served in various branches of the military. Didn't they, Brother Morris? Some were Green Berets, not Brother Morris. But then we became Christians. We learned the way of peace and we let go of such warfare. Figuratively speaking, we pulled the pin on our last hand grenade and tossed it into the air, killing no one or nothing. Just a loud ka-boom. But in heaven, we will serve along with Christ and his holy angels, waging the final war against God's enemies.
So Jehovah's Witnesses already almost do what Mormons do. They reprint the talks of top leaders afterwards, but the only thing they don't do is they explicitly call out who gave the talk and where it was given. I think that will change for one specific reason, and that reason's name is Anthony Morris, former governing body member, off the governing body as of 2023. Witnesses have a major problem if leaders are occasionally going to suddenly disappear for unknown reasons. The trouble is when that happens, members don't know what to think about that guy's talks and the counsel he gave. Should they ignore it, or is it still valid? When he gave that talk, was he speaking as the Spirit-inspired governing body member, in which case what he said is still as valuable as gold, or was he speaking as the disgraced man who's fallen from grace, in which case his words should be discarded like stinky old garbage? Now, it's not such an issue in video form. Videos can simply be deleted off the website, as has happened with many of Anthony Morris's talks. It's much more of a problem when the talks of governing body members are being reprinted as Watchtower study articles. As it stands right now, how can the organization retract a single article as being uninspired or wrong? It just kind of exists in the big pot that is spiritual food. And the idea that one article could be retracted instantly kind of brings all other articles into question. But if the article said, by Anthony Morris, well, then it's a much more straightforward matter for members to ignore what it says without poisoning the rest of the well. So this brings me to another possible development, which is having a correlation department. So as we've already mentioned, governing body talks transcripts already exist at headquarters. And I have very little doubt that before the talk is given, it's vetted and reviewed by other people. I don't think any governing body member or helper is just randomly walking up at the annual meeting and giving a talk on whatever the heck he feels like talking about, unreviewed by anybody else in the religion. The correlation department in the LDS Church essentially oversees everything in the sense that it makes sure that what is presented in talks, in print, in videos, is in agreement with the religion's present truth. It's all aligned or correlated. I'm pretty sure that probably a similar department already exists at JW headquarters, and I'm thinking we may see it come into more prominence as time goes by and doctrines gradually evolve further and further from where they began. This department would verify, for example, that no speaker is using an old interpretation of what Jesus meant by generation. They would ensure that no speaker these days is quoting from the book Commentary on the Letter of James, which at one time was a much-loved book in the religion, but which was written by Ed Dunlap, who would go on to be expelled from the religion in 1980 during the Great Apostate Purge, along with other headquarters staff like Ray Franz. So in his talk at the 2023 annual meeting, governing body member Jeffrey Winder briefly mentions a research department at headquarters which would delve into a subject and prepare a report for the governing body when asked to.
Does it warrant additional research? And if the answer is yes, then a research team is assigned to provide recommendations and research for the governing body to consider. And this research includes a summary of everything that we have said, the organization has said on the subject since 1879. All the watchtowers, what have we said? Also, it includes what the context of the verse indicates about its meaning. Further, what bearing do parallel accounts have on the understanding of the account, if there are any parallel accounts? And finally, what impact does the original Hebrew or Greek have on our understanding of the verse? Well, once that whole research package is compiled, it's placed back on the governing body's agenda for review. And of course, once it goes on the agenda, then each individual member of the governing body, under prayer, reviews the information and thinks about it in preparation for the meeting.
We also have the example of the well-known exJW Barbara Anderson, who worked in the research department at headquarters, for example, helping to write and research the Proclaimer's book, which is the most in-depth history of the religion that has been produced and approved by the religion itself. Now, interestingly, the LDS Correlation Department also does statistical research. Some might more cynically call it market research, but they do random sampling surveys of members once or twice a year, sending surveys out to various Mormons. And people inevitably screenshot these, so they can often be found on the ex-Mormon subreddit. Now, I haven't really heard exactly of JW headquarters surveying witnesses, but I could definitely see where it's something they might start doing in the future. Now, the idea of the religion not simply issuing doctrine from on high, but getting member input as well, kind of leads into our next point, which is that we may see increased use of pilot programs to test potential changes in the religion. So, as an example, we already mentioned that in 2019, the LDS Church reduced its Sunday services from 3 hours down to 2 hours. However, it was actually mentioned on the Mormon Stories podcast that years earlier, the church was running pilot programs back in 2006 to test out that change. They were evidently not unhappy with the results because 13 years later, they rolled that out to the entire religion. Now, we know that Jehovah's Witnesses as a religion have done pilot programs in the past to essentially market test how potential changes would work. A recent example was testing out resuming in-person meetings during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Wasn't it exciting to see the recent JW News article about the pilot program to resume in-person congregation meetings in selected lands? It's been a long time since we've been able to be together in person. You might be wondering, what led up to the pilot program?
Another example is when various training schools run by the religion are revised.
Often when a school is revised, a pilot class is taught. Brothers from the schools department can observe and listen to comments and suggestions from the instructors. They can then make further adjustments before the updated school is taught worldwide.
Perhaps the most well-known example is when Jehovah's Witnesses began doing CART witnessing, otherwise known as Special Metropolitan Public Witnessing. A 2022 Watchtower tells us, for example, in 2001, the governing body approved the use of literature carts and other displays in France, and later in other places as well. The results were positive. In 2011, a pilot program was started in the United States in one of the busiest parts of New York City. And it gives some stats there. It says, clearly Holy Spirit was backing this work, so the governing body approved the use of literature displays in the worldwide field. So the religion first trialed this in 2001. They did another pilot program in 2011, and then it was in 2013, so 12 years after the original pilot, that it was finally rolled out to the whole religion. So we can see that the religion does test things out at times in a limited area that other areas may not see for many years, if at all. And this leads into the next thing we might possibly see in the future, which is the possibility of Jehovah's Witnesses reducing down to 1 meeting a week instead of 2. There's actually a post from Reddit user coming out of my cage a few months ago that a congregation in California is in right now a pilot program of trying out only 1 meeting a week. Around the same time, there was also a comment from Reddit user Larchwood mentioning the same thing, that a California congregation is trying out 1 meeting a week. Now, usually you do have to take Reddit posts with a big dose of salt, but these are two of the more trustworthy folks on the exJW subreddit. Larchwood's reputation precedes himself. Coming out of my cage is the creator of the JWS literature database, so I tend to give them more credence than I otherwise would. And really, 1 meeting a week seems like it could be a logical change. The preaching work is gradually being de-emphasized more and more for most members, and that was kind of the whole point of the midweek meeting, was primarily to train witnesses in preaching and public speaking. Also, eliminating 1 meeting per week would make being a witness easier on the members, which from the religion's perspective would hopefully boost retention. That said, it's true that making a religion easier for adherents can be a two-edged sword, since paradoxically, the tougher a religion is to be in, research indicates that the more devoted the adherents are to that religion. I've talked more about that in depth in a past video, thumbnail here if you want to check it out. Now, at any rate, the thing is that in both the LDS Church and Jehovah's Witnesses, we do see a good 10-year lag between the pilot programs and when the changes were ultimately introduced. So if 1 meeting a week is being tested right now, it could well be a decade before it's rolled out. Certainly, on the one hand, they want to just test the mechanics of it, what the best format of the meeting is, what parts do they leave in versus what they take out. But I'd imagine they also want to see the long-term effects. What happens to witnesses in that congregation, both the adults and the kids? Are they more or less likely to leave the religion 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Are they more or less likely to have kids, to pioneer, or enroll in SKE? Do the donations go up or go down? So that'll be an interesting one to see how it pans out. All right, another question I've been kind of pondering is, will we see splinter groups form within Jehovah's Witnesses or even break away from it? Again, that's something I kind of discussed more in that other video. But we have seen former witness bigwigs kind of lose their enthusiasm for the religion. A notable example is the former circuit overseer Rolf Ferrulli in Scandinavia. And then there's always the question of why exactly Anthony Morris is no longer on the governing body. If it is because he became disenchanted with the way the organization's going, it's safe to say he's not the only one. As the religion gradually becomes more like mainstream Christianity, as it seems to kind of be trying to do, there is people that will get bored with that and really want to delve into the deep things of God. We may see an indicator of this in the steady rise of partakers at the memorial. There's a number of Jehovah's Witnesses deciding for themselves that they are born-again Christians, just as Ray Franz, Ed Dunlap, and other apostates of the 1970s and 80s did. In Mormonism, we've seen small groups get really deeply into esoteric beliefs to the point of actually murdering family members they believe have gone over to Satan. On the other hand, there's also a number of more progressive or more liberal Mormons who kind of take that cafeteria approach to the religion. They follow the rules they want to, and they ignore the rest. Well, all the time, still very much considering themselves Mormons in good standing. There's even an annual conference called Sunstone, where liberal Mormons meet to fraternize and give presentations on topics that would never really be covered at your average Mormon church service. So I do wonder, will we see this broader diversity of beliefs among Jehovah's Witnesses in the future? Will there be witnesses that advocate vocally for LGBTQ rights, that JW kids should go to college, that women need a bigger role in the religion? It's hard to say for sure. But I mean, I can imagine a scenario where maybe, 60% of witnesses are kind of average or normal in their beliefs, 20% are super conservative and hardcore, and 20% are more liberal and nuanced in their beliefs. So we shall see. Okay, another question I was wondering, will conventions and assemblies be downsized more? Back in the 1920s, witness conventions used to be 9 days long, and they've gradually shrunk in length though as the years have gone by. I just barely remember 4-day conventions in the 1980s, and then the Thursday session was dropped and became the current 3-day sessions. Will it go down further? So the LDS Church does two-day programs, and then they have 2 regional conferences, kind of similar to Witness Special Assembly Days. So I'm not sure which is better, to have 1 3-day convention or 2 2-day conventions. I guess the 2-day ones would mean people wouldn't have to take a weekday off of work, so that would be nice. The really big advantage with the LDS conferences is you don't have to go anywhere to attend them. You can pretty much just watch it in your house. Now, on the other hand, culturally, summer conventions, international conventions have just always been such an iconic part of witness life for more than a century. It's hard to picture them going away. So I don't know. Another question, will tattoos be allowed in the future? In 2022, the LDS Church revised its manual for young people called For the Strength of Youth, and folks immediately noticed that a line which explicitly banned tattoos, multiple piercings, and body piercings had been taken out. And this kind of opened the way for faithful believing members to feel that they could do any or all of those things and remain in good standing. So I feel like that's a possibility for Jehovah's Witnesses. I think it's another thing that could be pretty easily put in the policy category as opposed to doctrine, and thus be more easily reversed, like the ban on beards was. Another thing I was thinking as a possibility is that they will be focused more on getting more young people to attend SKE, this is the School for Kingdom Evangelizers. So at the April 2022 LDS General Conference, the church president told everyone that contrary to what some might have thought, it is not optional but mandatory for every young Mormon man to serve a 2-year mission. At the October 2022 annual meeting of Jehovah's Witnesses, governing body member Mark Sanderson announced that they would be dropping the minimum age for brothers to attend SKE from 23 down to 21. It's kind of an echo of what the LDS Church did back in 2012. They reduced the minimum age for young men to be missionaries from 19 down to 18. Additionally, Sanderson stated that instead of waiting for applications to come to them, circuit overseers would be proactively inviting young people to attend SKE.
Here's another arrangement that we have not publicly announced before, but we will today. Circuit overseers have also been informed that they may invite qualified young brothers between the ages of 21 and 23 to apply to attend the School for Kingdom Evangelizers.
And that kind of makes sense to me. Many young folks in their late teens are extremely zealous religiously, and also they have no responsibilities really of work or family. But if you fast forward a few years, at that point they may be married, they may be in college, or just otherwise more tied down. So if you can get them through the religion's intensive training program, which in Mormonism means taking classes at a missionary training center and then being sent for that 18 to 24 month mission. And for Jehovah's Witnesses means attending classes at SKE and then being assigned somewhere to serve indefinitely. That relatively small investment on the part of the church can really lock a person into the religion for decades to come. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if witnesses dropped the minimum age for SKE even further in the future. Another change I could see happening is that only certain people in Jehovah's Witnesses are assigned to do the preaching. That's pretty much how it is in Mormonism. Only the missionaries do the door-to-door or public preaching in any given area. And they do that for 2 years, and then they really generally never do it again for the rest of their life. So witnesses have been gradually de-emphasizing door-to-door preaching. Members no longer have to report how many hours they spend preaching. There's no minimum, like there used to be that 10-hour minimum in effect. Regular pioneers used to do 100 hours a month. Now they're down to, I believe, 50 hours a month. And I remember in my congregations, there were multiple pioneers doing 90 hours a month, and we would still be doing good to cover our entire preaching territory even once every year. And even back then, there were plenty of rural areas in America that were labeled either seldom work territory or just unassigned territory, areas that no one covered unless a group from out of town would come in and blitz it in a few days. And notably, many pioneers who are preaching now spend their time grouped 2, 3, or 4 people around a single cart in an urban area. So I have to believe that for many congregations, there's just no way that they're going to cover their territory in a timely way with the level of preaching done now. And so instead of a congregation trying to cover their entire territory, I assume that only certain selected areas will be covered that are selected by the elders probably. And I could see where instead of everyone in the congregation ostensibly assigned to preach until the day they die, as it has been historically, I could see where maybe witnesses will sign up to do a year or so of intensive preaching activity, kind of like the Mormon missionaries do now. It might be called something like being a Nazarite, maybe, something where you take a vow of service for a limited time period. I was thinking that since training for preaching is gradually being de-emphasized in the midweek meeting, it might even be that the pioneers or Nazarites or whatever they're called would attend pioneer school before their service period starts, not after the first year ends, in order just so they get some training on how to actually do it. And outside of that, I could see where congregation members might not really preach formally door to door anymore. Maybe there would be just like a special campaign once or twice a year that the whole congregation would do, passing out some special tract or the memorial invite or convention invitations, something like that. It sounds a little weird to eliminate preaching for rank and file witnesses, but doing pre-convention work for several weeks before every summer convention used to be a huge part of JW culture. Now I'm guessing most witnesses under 40 years old have probably never even heard of pre-convention work. So things can change. We'll see what happens. In tandem with that, another thing I was thinking about was whether they would shorten the study process before people could get baptized. People who are interested in becoming Mormon, they can get baptized after just 6 study sessions. For potential witnesses, it's typically at least 6 months or 26 weeks. So I don't know, I could see that being cut in half at least. There's plenty of 8 and 9-year-olds getting baptized these days in the religion, and they really don't understand much beyond a few of the biggest beliefs in a very basic way. So why should there be one standard for what kids need to know before baptism and a different standard for an adult getting baptized? Hey, we can even turn to the Bible for support. There's plenty of examples in the Greek scriptures of converts getting baptized right off the bat the day they first hear about Christianity. The way it works right now, potential converts have to become an unbaptized publisher and be preaching for a while and then get baptized. But in many ways, it makes more sense for someone to get baptized first. I mean, logically, the person you want out there representing the religion is an official member of the religion, not so much a random person who's only just learning about the religion himself. And this kind of ties in well with how preaching is getting de-emphasized anyhow. On another somewhat related topic, I was pondering, would JW headquarters ever encourage their members to start preaching via social media? Earlier this year, the LDS Church rolled out another pilot program that was related to sharing the church's message on social media. And they pointed out that hearing a message from someone you know personally can often be more effective than from a stranger. Now, the LDS Church has a long history of encouraging its members to use their online presence to indirectly promote the Mormon lifestyle. You know, when blogs were really big, there were Mormon mommy bloggers that were a huge part of the blogosphere. Now you've got things like Mormon tradwives like Ballerina Farm with a huge footprint on social media. There's also reality shows like Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. For JWs, it's been a little different. I think the religion's historically been pretty gun-shy about members spending much time on social media, but given enough time, the organization does usually adopt new technology, so it's a possibility maybe. I was even wondering whether the religion itself would eventually start its own YouTube channel. The LDS Church actually has a number of channels. They have kind of a main one, they have one just for kids programs, and then they have a newsroom channel. Now again, Jehovah's Witnesses have typically been pretty gun-shy about being online other than their own website. But YouTube's definitely a site with a lot of potential to reach people. Like and subscribe. Another question, I was wondering, would Jehovah's Witnesses ever kind of rebrand and maybe change their name a little bit? You know, the Mormons, they went from really leaning into the word Mormon. They had like a I am Mormon, I'm a Mormon campaign. And then they went to saying that even just using the word Mormon was a victory for Satan. And they switched to only being Latter-day Saints. Now they're de-emphasizing the Latter-day Saint part and just using the first part, the Church of Jesus Christ, so that now in much of their advertising, you'd be hard-pressed to even tell it's for the Mormon Church. They recently changed their logo to be more Christ-centered. In Google Maps, Mormon churches used to be noted with the little angel Moroni symbol, and now they've switched to just using a cross like other Christian churches. They changed their temple endowment ceremony to have more parts featuring Jesus in it. Now, at the moment, Jehovah's Witnesses do seem to be leaning pretty hard into the JW thing, but I don't know. I could see them also perhaps de-emphasizing the Jehovah part and just doing something like the Witnesses, something kind of more generically Christian. I guess they could even drop it all together and go back to Bible students. I don't know if any of the existing Bible student groups have that name trademarked, but you know, it's possible Joseph Rutherford is the leader that changed the name to Jehovah's Witnesses, and there's certainly enough dirt on Rutherford that the current leadership could kind of throw him and his decisions under the bus if they really wanted to. Historically, witnesses haven't spent a ton of time on Jesus, but there does seem to have been more of a shift in recent years to doing that. They've invested a ton into this video series about Jesus. They released a new song at the convention this year that is definitely, to my ear, pretty similar to a Christmas song. Again, I'm not sure that it would be 100% a good move to do that to please current members, but it does make sense that if they want to attract new members, being more mainstream Christian and a little less Jehovah-centric is the way to go. Another way to help the numbers would be to get inactive witnesses back again. I would expect continued and even increased emphasis on contacting inactive witnesses. There was a slide deck leaked to the ex-Mormon subreddit a couple years ago, and it mentions that in 2020, the LDS Church started another pilot program in a number of locations, and the goal was to aggressively find and reactivate inactive members. It was called the Finding Lost Members Pilot. And it was deemed a success to the point that it was rolled out to the whole church in 2022. And it basically involves attempting to contact these inactive ones by every possible avenue, using their phone, email, social media, talking to their known friends and family to get their contact info, talking to the current occupant of their last known address to try and get their current address. The Reddit user that posted this, his point was, well, you better remove your name from the church records now because otherwise they're tracking you down. And interestingly, there's actually a website designed to more or less automate the process of resigning from the LDS Church. It's called quitmormon.com. And I wouldn't be surprised if in the future there's maybe a similar quitJW site that forms, which will allow people to pretty easily disassociate from Jehovah's Witnesses. I would expect to see continued struggles around LGBTQ issues for the Jehovah's Witness religion. The LDS Church is maybe one step ahead of Jehovah's Witnesses in this arena. Currently, the LDS Church holds that gay people can and do exist. It's not just a lifestyle that you can change your mind about, but that's it. Gay Mormons can't act on that part of themselves. They can identify as gay, but they can't marry. There's no gay marriage or relationships. There can be no public displays of affection. You either have to be celibate until you die, or you can marry what they call a mixed orientation marriage, so marrying a heterosexual partner, and hopefully doing that will turn you straight, is their theory. Jehovah's Witnesses are still in the stage where they don't actually acknowledge that gay people exist. They just view it as a lifestyle choice. It's interesting that, at least up to this point, I don't think they've ever had an interview or JW broadcasting segment with an ex-gay witness, quote unquote, someone who overcame their gay tendencies and is now ostensibly a straight witness. Although I guess they're probably unintentionally dodging a bullet by doing that. In Mormonism, there's this revolving door of, and other conservative religions, where members are lauded for beating the gayness, and then inevitably most of them leave the religion a few years down the road as openly gay individuals. I would say it's probably inevitable that eventually both Jehovah's Witnesses and the LDS Church will catch up with larger society in accepting and acknowledging LGBTQ people, but they will need to be dragged kicking and screaming. I'm pretty sure it'll be similar to how they handled race relations in the U.S. They changed not until the very last second. It was only after the full civil rights movement of the 60s and 70s, and after equal treatment of different races became federal law, when it became illegal not to be integrated and non-discriminatory. It was only at that point that witnesses ended having segregated congregations in the parts of the U.S. where those existed. And it was only then that the LDS Church changed its policy that black members to that point couldn't be full-fledged members of the church. You know, the LDS Church has made a number of blunders in the LGBTQ arena, and I'm sure we'll see Jehovah's Witnesses make a bunch as well as they walk those steps as well. In 2015, for example, the Mormon Church decreed that all members in legal same-sex unions or marriages were automatically apostates and were out. And additionally, that any children of theirs would be barred from virtually any role in the church solely because of what their parents did, and that when the children finally turned 18, they could then get baptized, but only on the condition that they officially disavowed same-sex marriage, had to move out of their parents' house, and had to get permission personally granted by the First Presidency, which is the top 3 men in the church. That policy was extremely unpopular, and in 2019, the church announced that, wouldn't you know it, God had changed his mind again, and they reversed that decree. But going back to it, in 2024, just this year, the LDS Church announced strict new policies on transgender members. They're now barred from serving as teachers or working with children and youth. They must also be chaperoned when using multi-occupant church bathrooms. The church has essentially placed them in the same category that the church places convicted sex offenders. So yeah, based on how the LDS Church has handled queer LGBTQ members, I think we can expect some rough times ahead for LGBTQ witnesses. I think we can expect that witnesses will at some point acknowledge that gay people really exist and that they can be witnesses. But based on what we've seen in Mormonism, we'll probably see a lot of icky stuff. There may be recommendations for conversion therapy. We'll see probably support groups or peer groups of gay witnesses trying to live a straight lifestyle for them, recommendations to enter into mixed orientation marriages to try and turn these witnesses straight. We may see policies rolled out to apply pressure to kids of gay couples, as in Mormonism, maybe forbidding the kids getting baptized. And we may well see things like LGBTQ witnesses barred from holding any elevated positions like pioneer, ministerial servant, elder, Bethelite, that kind of thing. Another thing I think we will see down the road is more diversity on the governing body. So like with Jehovah's Witnesses, the leadership of the LDS Church is extremely white. In 2018, they added their first non-white apostle, which again, an apostle is equal to a governing body member. This was an Asian American man named Garrett Gong. Recall that Mormonism banned African Americans from being in the priesthood until 1978. And so in that regard, witnesses are actually ahead of the LDS Church. They actually have one black man on the governing body, Samuel Hurd. But the LDS Church does have a few men of color in the pipeline in the next level down of men, and witnesses do as well. I was kind of pondering why we haven't seen an Asian or Asian American governing body member yet, because when you think about Japan or South Korea or the Philippines, the witnesses there tend to be very hardcore, super zealous. I remember hearing about congregations in Japan where half the members were regular pioneers. Like, it doesn't get any more zealous than Japan. But I think it kind of gets into the pyramidal or hierarchical structure of the organization. New governing body members are usually pulled from the high-ranking men in the religion, either men already working at Bethel headquarters, or if they're not there, men in leadership positions around the world. Typically, those are branch committee members, the top guys in any given country. And in many countries, much of the branch committee historically has consisted of white missionaries that served in that country for years and maybe helped start the religion there from almost nothing. You can really see that when you look in the yearbooks that Jehovah's Witnesses used to publish. Usually each yearbook would cover the history of witnesses in 3 countries. And you can invariably see that the men overseeing the work in each country were white usually. Especially before the 1970s, when there wasn't even a branch committee. It was just a branch overseer, and that would often end up being a longtime missionary, someone who was personally trained at Bethel by the top watchtower guys, and he knew how to run things the watchtower way. Now, I do think when you look at pictures of branch committees from the past 10, 20 years or so, it does seem like the organization is consciously trying to have the men overseeing the religion in the given country actually be from that country. So that's good. I think it also helps that Gilead, maybe contrary to popular belief, is no longer a school to train missionaries. That's what it was in the beginning. It would take mostly Americans, and then it would send them off to a foreign country. Now it's almost the exact opposite. It's basically an internal management training course like a lot of large corporations have. Gilead takes non-Americans, brings them to the U.S. They live at Warwick Bethel for 5 months and kind of see how Watchtower wants things done. They get trained by the governing body and headquarters staff, and then they go back to their country. So I do think it is just a matter of time until we see an Asian or Asian American governing body member. The one thing that argues against that theory is that we have seen a decent number of governing body members come from Europe or Australia, New Zealand over the years, and that doesn't really fit the theory because those countries also had lots of imported missionaries, and there were Americans running the branches. And so how did they end up on the governing body? Well, it kind of brings us back to the one thing that guys from America, Western Europe, and Australia all have in common is they're all white guys, which I hate to point out, but if the shoe fits, wear it, I guess. One interesting thing I was thinking about is whether Jehovah's Witnesses will make a department to hunt down dissenters or potential apostates. So this is something that the LDS Church has. It's very hush-hush, but it's called the Strengthening Church Members Committee, which is kind of ironic. But that's their job, to suss out troublemakers and get rid of them. This was kind of a creepy job posting that somebody put up on the ex-Mormon subreddit. It's from the LDS Church, and the job is to be on the social listening team. And it's basically, it says, use social listening tools to identify emerging online conversations and predictive analytics and modeling to anticipate their trajectory and impact. So basically monitoring social media to check out where the trouble spots are and then report that to church officials. So I don't know, maybe Jehovah's Witnesses have something like that already, but if they don't, I bet they will before too long. So this is kind of an interesting one. Jehovah's Witnesses might make public their confidential rule book that currently only the elders can read, Shepherd the Flock of God. Now, it is always available in leaked form online, but officially it's something unavailable to all rank and file members. In the LDS Church, their rule book or handbook used to be the same way. It was confidential. But then in 2020, the church decided to just make it publicly available to everyone. And I think that makes a lot of sense. It was never very logical to me that congregation members are beholden to obey all the rules in this book, and yet they can't look in it to see what the rules are. So yeah, I could see them maybe combining the Elders Handbook with the OD book, which is the book available to all members, which does at least have some information about policies and procedures. Another thing I was thinking about, will Jehovah's Witnesses start using celebrity witnesses more prominently to kind of attract new members? It's kind of a two-edged sword. There's a pattern in the LDS Church of where they use celebrity Mormons to endorse the church, and then these people decide to leave the church, and the LDS Church has to drop them, and they move on to some new celebrity. And you see this with various musicians, singers. They'll have kind of like gay people who are advocating how well their mixed orientation marriage works, and then a few years down the road they're getting divorced and being in an openly same-sex relationship and leaving the church and looking much happier. I think it's probably inevitable that the JW religion will eventually get into that same situation with actors playing kind of beloved characters in Jehovah's Witness dramas and videos, like Jade and Nita type things. They're really going to be in a pickle if the actress playing Mary in the Jesus video series leaves, or even, heaven forbid, the actor playing Jesus himself. You can already find instances where the religion has had to change things due to people leaving. Jake from Altworldly pointed out that there's this video series on jw.org called Preparing for Marriage, and there's a part 1 and there's a part 3, but part 2 is missing in action. I remember the brochure Jehovah's Witnesses in Education, and it started out with one cover, and then a couple of years later they photoshopped in a new girl to replace the old one. So I don't know, they might avoid using celebrities to avoid those pitfalls that the LDS Church has run into. But on the other hand, they are doing it somewhat. They've done a video featuring Jason Worlds, who was an NFL linebacker with the Steelers. They've done a video on Andrei Nesmachny. Probably butchered that name, sorry. He was a pro football player, soccer player in Ukraine. So will we see Serena Williams on JW Broadcasting one of these days? Hard to say, but I guess don't rule it out. Another change I was thinking about, whether circuit overseers would ever be eliminated as a paid position and they would instead make it something that's handled by a local brother. So the LDS Church has stakes, which is roughly equivalent to witness circuits, and they're managed by a stake president who is a local church member that lives there. Now, I will say the LDS Church does have bureaucracy between the stake and up at headquarters. So there's men called area authorities and general authorities. And witnesses eliminated the district overseers about 10 years ago. So it's not an exact match to Mormonism anymore. Jehovah's Witnesses are running more lean. But I don't know. I do like this idea of a local brother being a circuit overseer. Each circuit already has substitute circuit overseers, which are elders who can step in to do a CO visit if the CO is sick or otherwise out of commission that week. Larger cities in the U.S. also have a city overseer who's a longtime elder who kind of helps coordinate things as needed between all the congregations in a city. So I could see where these types of men, other prominent elders, could take over the circuit overseer role. As we see kind of gradually more and more of the meetings, just our content streamed from headquarters. And then also at the same time, as we mentioned, territory will presumably be worked less frequently. And so it kind of seems like there's less need for an on-the-ground direction from a circuit overseer who would need to spend a whole week with a congregation every 6 months to keep them connected and in sync with headquarters. Maybe instead of a week with each congregation, the CO would spend a weekend with the congregation. Or maybe instead of the CO going to visit each congregation, maybe the pioneers and elders would instead come to where the CO lives and meet more frequently with him during the year. That's kind of more how the LDS church does it. I was thinking we might perhaps also see more emphasis on differentiating the coordinators of the bodies of elders from the rest of the elders. Right now, pretty much all elders are treated the same when it comes to going to elders meetings, but we might see a little bit of a shift where the coordinators, all the coordinators in a circuit, travel to attend circuit level meetings with the CO, and then they come back to disseminate the information back to each of their bodies of elders. Although the organization has, I'm sure, shifted most of the expenses of a circuit overseer onto the local circuit already, I bet they would like to just eliminate that entirely and rely on local elders to handle those duties. And in addition to just being cheaper for the organization money-wise, there's an additional benefit, which is that the governing body, the upper leadership, are one step more insulated from seeming like they're doing any dirty work. The local folks are taking on the responsibility and the liability, and meanwhile the governing body can kind of seem more holy and kindly to the religion. We've mentioned that one example already of how the governing body members stepped away from being board members on any watchtower corporations, so they're insulated from that. A while back, they made a policy change that circuit overseers are the ones that appoint elders, not headquarters, as it ostensibly used to be. In the new direction about disfellowshipping, it will be the local elders who decide if and when to disfellowship a minor, so kind of insulating headquarters from negative press about that if they want to spin it like that, since the direction now is to avoid disfellowshipping teens if possible, although elders still are allowed to. They can if they feel it's necessary. There was an episode of Mormon Stories podcast which commented on how creating this distance between the actual leaders and the underlings really benefits organizations.
Yeah, it's much more effective if you want to have high control over your organization to have people under you enforcing the rules versus you having to enforce the rules yourself.
Exactly.
Then you can be the good guy. You can stay pure. If mistakes, this is why the Mormon Church is really insistent that bishops and stake presidents, excommunicate people, not the church leaders. It's plausible deniability. It saves them time. It lets other people do the dirty work. If mistakes happen, again, it's the local mistake. There's no legal liability, less legal liability up top. There are all sorts of reasons why you want to push down responsibility to your membership.
So yeah, we'll have to see what happens with COs. I'm kind of curious about that. And the last thing I was thinking about, always a classic question, will they adjust the ban on blood transfusions in any way? It was funny when listening to governing body member Stephen Lett when he was giving that talk about the new policy on beards. It almost seemed at times like he was just citing the JW Facts article about beards and why it was unscriptural to ban them. And it's definitely a similar situation with blood products. The explanations for why refusing blood is unscriptural, they've all already been written by ex-witnesses. All the organization really has to do is just read them on JW Broadcasting. It did catch my eye that earlier this year there was a Bethel sister on Reddit for a little while, and she did post that there were changes to the blood policy coming. So who knows? We shall see. Well, that's kind of what I came up with for possible predictions or things that might change in the organization. I'd be curious to hear what things you think were left out or how possible these things are. So, yeah, let us know. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you like for more videos coming down the pike. And we'll catch y'all in the next one. Take care now.